Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. If you're paying attention, you know that you only make money when you work. It might be great money, but it's dependent on you. The information on this podcast will help you solve that. We interview experts and provide analysis into financial freedom through commercial real estate. Why? To help physicians like you thrive. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. This is your host, Dr. Michael McManus, and we are here today with Dr. Lee Newton. Lee has been a practicing optometrist for 24 years and also enjoys real estate development and construction immensely. He has helped other healthcare professionals, financial professionals, and tradespeople design and construct their own office suites and building affordably. Lee has a special interest in affordable housing. His thesis is that we have allowed housing costs to spiral way out of control. Lee, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's jump in first with kind of your road to real estate. What kind of led you down this road and out of just being a straight healthcare provider?
I was a healthcare provider first. That came first. And I remember when I was growing up, my dad was a tradesman and he did try to get me interested in the skilled trades. And it's not like I wanted to ever do anything that my parents wanted me to do. I wanted to chart my own, course in life. And remembering vividly growing up in the 80s and 90s and seeing the recessions of those eras and wanting to have a little more control over my future, those are the factors that drove me into healthcare. And then once I owned my own practice and practice building and home, I realized that there needed to be things to get done on these structures, and I couldn't afford to hire them all done. So I had to figure some things out on my own so I could maintain my practice, maintain my home and whatnot. And one thing led to another. I expanded out of the first office building, bought a second one, expanded that to accommodate tenants, and I had to act as my own general contractor a couple times, and I realized that everything is figure outable in the construction realm, and there are certain things that, okay, I'm not going to learn to be an electrician. I don't know much about water under pressure, and I don't want to work with drain lines, so I'll hire the pros for that. But in terms of designing and managing construction projects, a doctor can do this too. And a doctor can do this and save him or herself some significant money along the way.
So when did you build that second office when you moved into it?
We bought an existing building and rehabbed it. And then it
Okay.
was when we put an addition onto it to accommodate tenants that I took a more active role. And a few years after that, I put up a brand new office building with two partners. And one was an ophthalmologist, one's a close business owner friend of mine. I served as the general contractor just because we didn't want to spend another 100,000 more than it was already costing to build.
Okay. So in acting as the general contractor, you were the one who you found the subs, bid it out.
Mhm.
Now, did you play an active role in the design too? Um,
I did, and our architect at the time, he was a close friend of mine, and he took all of our collective input in designing the building. And side note, he passed away about a week after we broke ground, so we named the building after him, which in his honor, he was a great guy, and so he was open to that. I learned a lot about design through that phase as well.
okay. And so when you went through that design, it was with somebody you already knew and had a good relationship with.
Correct.
Okay. And that's interesting because I've been through a couple design processes with some architects, and it's funny, some of them it's like they really don't want your input. And they got their own idea of what they're going to build. And when you try and go outside of their normal box, it can become tricky. So that's great that you got an introduction to it with somebody who was listening to your input and wanted your input. Um, how much did you learn from that with him being a friend that then dealing with other architects down the road kind of helped you speak their language?
Yeah, that's a great question. I learned a lot during those years about building science as well, and that's one of my topics of interest. You know, the physiology of how buildings work. A house or a building doesn't need to breathe, for example. It's a common misconception that we think it needs to breathe. A wall assembly, a roof assembly needs to be able to dry in one direction, but humans need to breathe. So I learned a lot, but that stimulated even more passion and desire for learning even more. And I've connected with professionals such as 𝐲𝐨𝐮'𝐥𝐥 of Building Science Corporation. I've studied with him. Mark Rosenbaum of Energy Smiths. I took a net zero course with him. Allison Bales, Energy Vanguard, and some others. And I just kept learning along the way. And that helped me be able to help others design their buildings as well. And I can relate to what you said about, sometimes architects don't want your input. I did help a couple friends who own a healthcare practice. I put up their first building for them, and then they needed a second location. And so I helped them the design process. And the architects didn't really want to hear about our desired wall assembly. They wanted to say, well, we designed this with spray foam. Like, well, we don't want to use spray foam. We've designed this with dense pack fiberglass because it's going to fit our needs. It's going to fit our budget better. So they needed to kind of be up to speed with, yeah, we're not trying to take over. We don't have an architectural degree or a stamp, but we would like to play an active role in the design of this wall assembly because that's going to affect the budget, and we have a certain budget that we want to stay within.
And it sounds like though through your process, yeah, you didn't have the stamp from the state saying you're an architect and you didn't have the degree, but you put in a lot of hard work into educating yourself and understanding these processes.
Yeah, and learned a lot along the way and had some fun along the way too.
So was this all, so this is after you'd gone through your medical education, your healthcare education.
Mhm.
And when you kind of started down this road, um, how much time and energy were you putting into the education of doing this? And did you get anybody looking at you going, why don't you just hire somebody to do this? Why are you spending so much time on it?
Yeah, the answer is quite a bit. I mean, I've always thought that I have weird hobbies. A lot of my friends in my age bracket, other doctors, business owners, I mean, maybe they like to golf, and I'm just not a golfer. I mean, this is just one of my hobbies. I like to learn how to design and construct things more affordably, economically, sometimes more in a green manner, if you will, more energy efficiently. And yes, sometimes people think I'm a little bit weird when that conversation comes up, but it's just what I like to do. I recently helped an eye doctor friend of mine remodel an 8,300 square foot building that he purchased. And he felt, man, he was really going out on a limb because he had always rented his suite, and we were going to build. I had done a land assembly, that perfect location, but even about 4 years ago, construction costs were just adding up to more than what he was comfortable spending. So we found a great building to rehab, and along with about 18 cans of worms that we opened along the way, we rehabbed the whole thing. So he's got a 4,800 square foot practice. He rents a 3,300 square foot suite to a physical therapy center. We've got a beautiful building that the all-in cost is about 115 a square, which you can't touch that in new construction these days commercially.
No, that's a great price. That was we were trying at one point we with an existing building we were going to remodel and add onto it a surgery center, and it was right on the backside of COVID, and prices went up faster than we could get it designed. And what was a home run deal to begin with, by the time we started bidding it out, I mean, it really went from like a $3.5 million project to an $8 million project just over the course of like 2 years of trying to get it done. So that's great that you got that done for him. Now, how's he feeling about this? So this is, as you said this, he was kind of nervous and like, I've always rented and it's very predictable. And I find a lot of docs get hung up on that. There's the way they've always done it. And this is the way you do it, however they got introduced. And regardless of the benefits you can show. So, he's now owns the building, he's leasing it out, he's has income and equity coming in because of that. Um, How is that process of kind of walking him down the road of better to own?
I had to convince him at first. It was a big step for him to take, and he went from a roughly a 1,200 square foot leased space to 4,800 square feet that he played an active role in designing it. And he was nervous Nelly the whole process, and I felt bad because the build took a lot longer than I originally anticipated. If there's one thing that I could have done better, it would have been to accurately predict the amount of demolition we'd have to do. I underestimated the amount of demolition. That was my fault. But so what I thought maybe 10 dumpsters, I'm sure we had 24, 25 dumpsters all told. And
Oh
you know,
my
we had
goodness.
a building with we discovered some structural issues because of poor water management. So the sill plate was rotted, some of the lower portions of some studs were rotted, which doesn't seem that bad, but then you realize that, okay, this is a 80-foot clear span with trusses that are 2 by 8 top and bottom cords. That's a huge structural wall. So we had to jack it up, grout the cores of the blocks, put new anchor bolts in, put new sill plate, sister studs on, and just go along. And we probably fixed that problem for about $7,500, but it cost us a month and a half, right? But a big
Hmm.
firm would have looked at that as, oh, here's a chance for $100,000 contingency item. We can do it in 2 weeks, but it's going to be 75 to 100K. So it, price, quality, and time, you can, which two of the three do you want? But back to your question, to your point, he was real nervous, but then real happy when he opened up. And I talked to him recently. He says, "We're busier than all get out. We're just going crazy." I'm like, "Hey, that was the point, right? That was the goal, to have a bigger facility and grow into it and not ever have to expand again."
Yeah. What would you tell other healthcare providers if they were, looking at dipping their toe and not just leasing, whether it's their own building or owning another building? Um, and inside the back of their brain is just saying, "This is crazy." What what would you tell them as they start down this road?
I would tell them two things. Thing number one is talk to those who have been there and done it and get a smattering of experiences and internalize them and just talk to a lot of people and ask about their mistakes that they made, what they would do different. And then the second thing I would tell them is that you got to always remember that real estate pays you five different ways. And Wall Street pays you maybe one way because Wall Street wants us to invest for capital gains or appreciation. That's only one way that real estate pays you. You get cash flow, but if you own your own building, you basically get tax advantage cash flow that you're not paying FICA on, right? You get the appreciation, but you get leverage appreciation because if you're 20% invested, you get 5 times the actual appreciation rate. You get the depreciation, you get the amortization, and you get what Jason Hartman calls, I don't want to take credit for this because I think he trademarked it, inflation-induced debt destruction. Okay, so you're paying back today's debt with tomorrow's dollars. And so the debt gets diminished year by year as inflation goes up. So real estate pays you five ways. It's the best asset class that has ever existed. In
And
my
just as an and I agree. That's why we're here. Uh, and from the standpoint of somebody looking to get into it when they, that initial cost seems really big. And then when they're signing on the dotted line for that building that, you've bought a house, but typically when you're talking about an office, the price per square foot goes up considerably compared to a house. And the loan guarantee, when you're guaranteeing it personally versus your mortgage, basically you can lose your house, but they're not going to come after you for additional money. Um, have you heard people, are those their major concerns, or do they bring up other concerns?
I think a common concern is the perceived large chunk of liquid cash that they perceive necessary to have up front. And banks are more than happy to look at other assets as part of that down payment collateral mix as well. You know, funds maybe that are not as liquid, other assets that might be free and clear. So, I mean, if you're looking to do a $1 million project, you probably don't have to have 200K of liquid cash sitting there ready to deploy. And if you did, this is just my opinion, of course, you should try like heck to not allocate it all to that project. Put as little, you know, keep as much dry powder as you can, because you never know when the next opportunity is going to come along. You never know when the next black swan event in our economy is going to come along, and then you might need some of that dry powder.
Yeah, and it's, you know, until you deal with commercial bankers, because most docs I know have never dealt with a commercial banker. And there's one thing that most of them love as an owner operator. They love Most love medical practices. We ran into one who didn't. They're like, no, we're not touching that. But there's, and as you, and kind of like shopping for a mortgage is you talk to multiple people till you find the one who loves what you're doing, because then they make a much bigger effort and they give you better rates because they want it in your portfolio. But also as a practice, one of the other things they want is they want your deposits. And that's what we typically found is the difference if you put your whole deposit in, and you start running all your banking through them, the difference in the terms you get can be considerable. And that's because as a business bank, they don't have a bunch of small deposits. They need your deposits to leverage their loans, and that's how they do business. And I think a lot of people don't realize how much, especially if there's a considerable amount of cash flow through your practice, which usually there is. Your expenses are higher, but it's a lot of cash that moves through in a month, and the banks love that cash. And so there's a lot of leverage that comes with that.
Absolutely. And the banks love it because of the fractional reserve banking system.
Yeah, because they take your however much deposit and turn it into a lot more of loans.
Yes,
And so I think realizing that when you look at sometimes you look at the amount that a lot of docs will look at their practice and go, wow, we make X amount, but we pay half of that out you know, uh, as our expenses, our employees, all that. And it's always a negative thing. But then when all of a sudden that top number is what the bank's looking at and seeing how much cash flow goes through, they're giving you credit for that number that to you never thought was worth so much.
absolutely.
So going back when you were talking about fixing that building. So you're mentioning you're going back to where you were kind of I was going to say geeking out on the building process. And is that a lot from your background with with a family that was in the trades that you knew some of that, or is that a lot of what you learned along the way?
I would say it's both. My dad was a pipe fitter, so I learned about mechanical systems through him. But I learned a lot about, like, I'm a big thermal envelope guy. And what I mean by that is, if you study building science, Joe Stieberg says it best, buildingscience.com, there's four control layers. Okay. So in order of decreasing importance, starting with the most important, you got to control bulk water. You know, he tells the story. He's never gotten a call at 2 in the morning saying, my house is leaking air. The 2 in the morning calls are my roof is leaking water. So you got to control that. After that, you got to control air. And then vapor and thermal they can be tied for third or third and fourth. But if you take care of the first ones, the subsequent ones aren't as difficult. And so recognizing that utility costs are probably poised to continue to increase in the future, we may or may not be forced to electrify in the future. I don't think electrification is a bad thing. I think being forced to do something may be a bad thing. Um, Most times, if you're designing a home or an office and you can increase the R value, increase the insulation, you're better off doing that than putting that same money in the bank. And so in my friend's building, for example, parts of it had a block wall, just a block wall. Now, block is like R nothing. I mean, it takes like maybe 12 inches of concrete to get to R1. So there's like no R value in a block wall. And then other parts of it that were added onto had a 2x6 framed wall that had either fiberglass or blown in cellulose in it. And so all those exterior walls, we built another 2x6 wall inside of it and then dense packed the whole thing. So the block walls ended up with an inch of foam on the inside, then a 2x6 wall that was filled dense packed with fiberglass. The block walls probably ended up at R35 when we were done with a really, really good air barrier. The existing 2x6 framed walls probably ended up at about R50. So we just like doubled everything because we could, and we had the time to do it. And if you can lower your heating and cooling bills by, $100 a month or more during even the shoulder seasons, the heating and cooling can run a lot. You're saving that. That pays you back forever. It doesn't just pay you back now. That pays you back forever. That increases the value of the facility to future owner occupants as well and tenants as well.
What would you say is that? Do you have a number that you'd call your payback on those energy efficient?
Yeah, I really haven't done all the calculations that I should to talk about the payback on it, but I know we did it for, I know the payback's going to be quick because we might have used 250 bags of insulation and just Lee math, that's maybe pushing eight to $10,000 worth of insulation. And I would say that the payback on that 10K is 3 to 5 years at the most.
Okay. And that, especially if you live in a higher temperature change area, where if it's really cold or really hot.
Yes.
Now, what's different? And this I've heard things about, but I've never actually looked at the details. There's actually higher expense costs for living in a hot area like Phoenix or Dallas than in a cold area, that air conditioning is actually more expensive than heating.
I think I've heard that and I haven't studied it that much. There's this concept called heating degree days that needs to be looked at. A big factor is dehumidification. You know, it's it begs discussions of like a lot of HVAC contractors are happy to just oversize your cooling unit because they know that you'll have enough cooling capacity. But when the thermostat is satisfied too soon without the condensing unit removing the humidity from the air and it short cycles, you're not doing anybody any favors. There's the sensible load and then there's the latent load. And the latent load is all the activities that humans do that add moisture to the air. Okay, so bathing, cooking, doing laundry, those types of things. In a commercial office setting, it's not as much of a concern. I mean, I happen to have a shower here at my office, but I'm the only one that uses it. And we're not really doing much cooking. We have a microwave and we're not, it's just a little bit different. But um, I think I have read that it may cost more per BTU, however it's measured, to cool and remove humidity than it does to heat.
So and it's interesting. So I'm listening to all this and it's pretty cool. I like it, but then there's even a point where I go, okay, wait, now we're getting beyond my interest zone. So if somebody comes to you and and they go, well, this is all cool stuff because I want to save energy. I'd like to be, environmentally friendly. And I'd like to put that money in the bank over years and years, and knowing that it's going to increase the value of the building if you go to sell. These are all great things. Um, but I don't want to dig into the real nitty gritty of it. What advice would you give for how much they realistically need to know to actually have the conversation with the architects, with the builders, and say, this is what I want? Or I guess how would you suggest they have that conversation?
Yeah, jokingly, I could say talk with a nerd like me, and then we can have some conversations together. But that is really a great question. I think that some of the questions that need to be asked of the designers, the architects, the engineers are, what type of insulation did you spec? How much does it cost per, wall cavity or per inch of insulation? And how does that compare to other types? And how could we get more insulation? Sometimes the answer might be, well, in order to get more insulation, you'd have to go to a 2x4 exterior wall to a 2x6, and it's going to cost you more for the framing and the material and the labor. And here's the increase. Could you make that up in other ways? Could you deal with losing the floor space? Or from a 2x6 to 2x8, there's double wall construction too. So I think that someone has to have a little bit of a working knowledge of, okay, what is an average heating and cooling bill in this area, or what is an average heating cooling bill of this building as it is before I rehab it, and where do I want it to be, and how much am I willing to spend to get it there? Because if I have to spend an extra $25K to reduce the bills by $100 a month, I may not like that payback. I may put that $25K into another employee, a piece of equipment that I can add to the top line by more than $100 a month I'd save on the bottom line.
And so it's really get an idea for what is the payback, like how much does it cost and how much is it going to save you? And then maybe the outside calculation is how much does it change the value of the building if you don't plan on owning it for forever? I guess if you're, 28 and you're building a building that you're going to have your practice in for the next 50 years, the final cost, that you sell it for isn't going to be as big of a consideration because there's going to be so much else happen in those years. But
correct.
If you're looking at a shorter term exit, then the change in the value is going to be an important thing too.
For example, will there be an opportunity for will the utility provider give me a rebate for putting some solar panels on the roof, and that would offset more than the increased insulation and so forth?
Now, when you see that was something that when I was a kid and my parents were in a rural electric association, they got all kinds of great rebates because the Rural Electric Association basically had their production capacity, and they were working really hard on not having to either build another power plant or start buying energy on the outside. So they gave lots of great rebates to save energy. And I haven't heard as much being in the city of that same type of rebate. Have you seen those when you're or with commercial buildings where you're getting those same benefits?
I haven't seen those types of rebates from the utility supplier. I've seen some government incentive rebates, tax credits, if you will. I haven't really seen anything that seems to make it attractive yet. I mean, years ago, my thesis was that the equipment and the install cost too much. I mean, in essence, you're paying for 25 years of electricity up front. So then you get 25 years worth of electricity. That's the lifespan. And then where are you? You have to start all over. And then you have these ugly looking things on your roof in the meantime, and your spouse may or may not like that. I mean, I'm all for solar, and I just think there's got to be a happy medium. It should be more overwhelmingly positive in favor of those willing to install it. And I think that, and this is just my opinion, that equipment and install prices have gravitated toward benefiting those doing the work rather than the end user that's taking a risk with the install just to get that tax incentive.
Yeah, because the tax incentives have been what paid for it versus the energy production.
Yes.
Well, this has been great. We're going to wrap up this first part of our interview with Dr. Lee Newton here. And then when we come back, I encourage everybody to join us for the next half of the show, because we're going to dig in a bit more to what he's doing now and talk a little bit more about his special interest, affordable housing. So Lee, thank you for being here, and everybody else join us for the second half of this conversation here on Surgeon Syndicate.
Do you care about paying too much in taxes? And would you like to save more of your hard-earned dollars? Here's what we found. We found that most financial professionals have a one-size-fits-all solution. So the question is, would it make it easier for you to have someone tailor your tax solutions to your individual needs so you can keep more of your money and do what you want with it? That is exactly what we do at 𝐥𝐸LStra.
As surgeons, we know the difference between routine surgery versus life-threatening interventions. And I want you to know that I've used 𝐥𝐸LSA and her team for my personal financial intervention, and I love the results. I would do you a disservice if I didn't recommend them to you.
We'd love to help you, so let's jump on a call and see how we can collaborate. Simply go to www.𝐥𝐸LStra.com McManus and book your free call today.
This has been an episode of Surgeon Syndicate. If you got value from this episode, you know other surgeons are hungry to become job optional, and you can help them by sharing this content today. Schedule a call and we can make a plan. Looking forward to having you with me on the next episode.